which I thought, and I told Jelly Peters today, I thought that Eight Corners would be a great location for a community center.
Yeah, I also
Eight
think,
Corner School.
I assume
Yeah.
this is part of the discussion.
Because
Yeah.
the
So I'm gonna be back.
should pass
Because it
up.
doesn't have a neighborhood.
Bob, can you hear us okay?
Right.
Live.
Yeah.
I'm
I'm
gonna mute for just a moment.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, can I hear you?
Brian, are you able to connect and share and such?
I am able to connect. We'll see about sharing.
Well, just, I know you put
Yes.
together some materials today.
Oh,
Didn't have time to
all right,
get back to you.
all right. In that case, let me get my, oh shoot,
Oh.
let me find my version of the shared, which the said materials, Tom, the alleged materials. Those.
I haven't read the.
I know we've met.
The national news.
What?
I have not read the national news. It says
Oh,
the
yeah.
S&P 500 rose
Yeah.
more than 9%.
Oh, we're all
told
rich,
you.
we're all rich again.
No,
I
I'm
know, well,
still
I
short
was
about
in-
20
I was like
grand, so.
In meetings
don't
in
get me going.
New Hampshire all day, and I didn't know, like, yeah, I didn't, silly me, hadn't refreshed my news feed in a couple hours, and
Yeah.
Yeah, so
But-
down 20 plus 10 is still.
Still-
minus,
yeah.
Short.
All the short sales must have settled.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, here we
Okay,
are,
here we go.
everybody.
Let's do it.
We're live and thank you all for being here. This workshop, is this a workshop, Tom?
Yeah,
Or a work session?
I guess you, you're born, you need to take action.
Let's see.
I'm a voter.
Oh,
Yeah, you have four.
oh, well, what do you hear?
So there are minutes, should you feel inclined.
Well, great. Well, then, thank you all for coming to this meeting of the Skyward Housing Alliance. On April 9th, 2025, 6:03. We are live. Great. And Corey, I think this is your first meeting here at the Alliance as a counselor.
yes,
Is that right?
yes, and so, yes, I was elected to the council in November, and I'm not a liaison to this group. Bill is the council liaison, but I am here as Bill and I are kind of co-champions of the
Right.
council's housing goal.
Okay, so you're
So-
a champion.
Yes, so I'm happy to have a seat at the table.
Great.
I'm a former champion.
You're a former champion. And Bill, you're also a champion and
Yes.
a liaison
Yes.
and former member.
Right.
Right.
Oh.
Wow, former voting.
Champion is not spelled with a U.
Well,
Not
that's
a
not-
champion.
all right, right. All right. Well, super. Well, glad to have everybody here. And Eric, I guess we're just regular members. Right?
That's it. I'm good with that.
Yeah, future, we're contenders. Yes. that's what it is. Great. We've got minutes from the 26th of February.
You want a
That-
motion?
Could somebody
So
kindly
moved.
make a motion? Thank you. Bill, is there a second?
Oh, second, sorry. I
Yeah.
forget I'm not the
Great.
liaison.
All right. Any discussion about the minutes?
Nope.
All right, Ellen. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Well, thank you, Bob. Great, they unanimously are approved. Next item is a review of the Affordable Workforce Partnership Initiative RFP.
Yeah,
Would you
I
kick us
don't
off
know
there?
that review is necessary, certainly action, I don't believe is. You may recall the Marshview Terrace project has two components, one of which is workforce. Workforce is a fairly recent, newer phenomenon. It is now really driven largely by Jean Marie's tenacity, included in chapter 405, so we actually define workforce. However, our RFP for the initiative program is an open rolling process, and frankly, that didn't reflect workforce in it. So what I've done, and I circulated a draft for your review, is simply drop that definition in and a couple of the very small language changes just to make sure that workforce projects are also eligible.
Mhm.
And that really is to enable the Marshview project or any other one that is workforce in nature to be at least eligible to apply. subject to review and recommendation. So again, no actions required. I just wanted you to be aware that it's been done. We'll post this updated version on the website, and what that will mean, I think you could expect to see 2 different grant applications from Marshview
Mhm.
coming your way in the next month or so.
Appreciate that, Thomas. So Tom, what I hear is that now our RFP that's been outstanding for a while is gonna conform with our, I guess in the past, updated zoning ordinance, and
That's right.
it's different definition and affordability and workforce.
Yeah, curiously,
So-
the program will always have workforce in its title.
Okay.
But now I think it's helpful just to make sure the definition's there and that there's just great clarity that it's now eligible for consideration.
So, great, super. Any questions, comments,
I,
expressions of appreciation for the
Uh,
work of Tom?
yes, and I'm thrilled to see it,
Mhm.
put in the package like that and formalized, because I think as time goes on, it's gonna be more and more important that we look at that population, so.
Just as an aside, I'll circulate it, and I should have included it, but staff has worked out a kind of a schedule, a process flow chart, but also schedule, for the Marshview project, because there's so many moving parts. Just to review them quickly, it started with contract zone. They've kind of passed the initial test. Now they're gonna be working through the planning board. As I alluded to, we expect there'll be 2 different CDAs for this project because of the 2 very distinct components. A necessary prerequisite for CDA is a TIF district being created, so the council is gonna have to
Yeah.
kind of work through creation of the TIF. And then there'll be 2 separate CDAs. One will run through this committee, vis-a-vis our new policy. The other one, I think probably should run through here as well, the workforce one. And then we do expect 2 different grants that this committee will receive and review as well. So there'll be a lot happening over the late spring, early summer. And for our own peace of mind, we just try to map this out and indicate what the typical meeting dates are, because there's a sequence that needs to be followed. And all of this heads toward them meeting final approval in the September timeframe, really in position for them to make application to main housing.
Mhm.
So it is important that we start to just understand what needs to be done when, so we can stay on track.
Yeah, the sequencing.
So I'll send that out just so you have a sense of
Good.
the moving parts.
I would like to just make a motion and ask somebody to second it. Just resolved that the Scarborough Housing Alliance endorses the inclusion of workforce housing in the eligible uses of funds from the Affordable/Workforce Housing Partnership Initiative Program.
Second?
Jean Marie, any discussion?
Mhm.
All in favor?
Thank you.
Great, there for you.
Do you have that written?
I do.
Can you email
I
that to me?
love
Thank you.
You didn't get it all?
it.
All but the last 2 words, Jean.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Great, super. On to the next item, which is a discussion about the housing workshop with town council. Which will take place May 7th of 2025. And I wonder if one of our champions or both of our champions could give us a little kickoff there.
Sure, so this, one of the council goals that was established in, January/February was really working to articulate an affordable workforce housing. I don't know if I'd call it policy, but really, at least a framework, which ideally would include some specific objectives. I think, it was left, I think, intentionally somewhat, fairly flexible and didn't want to, at least for myself, I can say, and Bill, I don't know whether you would agree, I've kind of gone out of my way, and I did, when I wrote my council corner about this a month or so ago, I tried to really make clear that, that it wasn't presupposing any particular set of goals, or that, we were going to prioritize one thing over another, but there's kind of this seemed to be a general acknowledgement and consensus on the council that this is something that's, it's an important issue for the town. And that we want to be intentional about it, and that obviously there's a lot of overlap with other things that the town is kind of grappling with around growth and schools and property taxes, all those things that come up whenever we talk about any kind of development, including housing and maybe especially housing. And so it was agreed that as a first step, we should hold a workshop to really have just hopefully a good thorough discussion about issues and objectives, and try to establish, at least in my mind, kind of get some general agreement on kind of vocabulary and next steps that can be taken to gather information, gather data about the nature of the market and the needs and so forth. But all this understanding that, while we're having these conversations, the world kind of moves on, and we have Marshview that's already moving forward, and we don't want to have this drag on unnecessarily, and we don't want it to be viewed as something that is where everything has to sort of be on hold while we're having a discussion, and it doesn't necessarily have some fixed endpoint to it. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but
Yeah,
that's
kind of
it really
table
kind of
setting.
leads to that May 7th date for a workshop to really start to dig into it
What's the council looking for?
in terms of the workshop.
What information, what?
I would say, I mean, the council hasn't really, there hasn't been discussion since the goal setting exercise about it. But I think again, I think the general understanding based on that and a couple conversations with council leadership is really around just kind of establishing the parameters of the challenge and what it is that we want to do.
Yeah, Corey, one of the things that kind of key phrases from what you just said was common vocabulary,
Yeah,
right? And I think that's really important, whether it's a council that's been on the council for a while or somebody who's brand new. There's a lot of, when we talk about housing, well, all of us in this room, and I think everybody on the council lives in a house. Like we're all housed, right? So we all suppose that we have experience with housing, and with that comes these intuitions that don't always align with the way the housing industry works. And that housing industry ends up being the real driver for how all this housing gets built, right? So we say the phrase affordable housing. People initially say, well, that doesn't sound affordable. And then professionals like us say, well, technically it is. And then we get into this distraction of conversation.
Mhm.
So if we can get a baseline of what is means, and I think that's a really good starting point, and maybe create some resources for people, and then if it goes well, maybe use this as a year after year thing, because it turns out housing is always a topic around here. We continue to exist, we continue to be useful, and we continue to be a resource to the council. So I really appreciate you having the opportunity to do this. I'm glad you guys had this idea.
Yeah, and I think it's important too, and I think we can talk about this at the workshop and beyond. It's sort of, this is all this is happening within the context of an existing set of zoning ordinances and a growth kind of growth management ordinance, and there are previous actions that have been taken that impact this. And so I think that's important too, to just recognize that this all exists kind of within that ecosystem.
Yeah, if I could, I think we should not assume anything here and really
Right.
start
Agreed.
at bedrock. In
Yeah.
many respects. My sense is there's probably a vast difference in level of understanding and appreciation among the seven councilors.
Yep.
And don't lose sight of the fact that we've got the public watching, and there's an opportunity to educate them, and I think. Council's in large part a microcosm of our community, but
Mhm.
but we've got an audience that we need to be educating out there as well, so. I think starting at the fundamentals is really important,
Yeah.
and we'll have, at the end of it, hopefully there's some indication from council where it goes from there. Maybe it's a secondary follow-up. workshop.
Yeah,
I'd like to see, frankly, because having run into this in my past years on the council, people still get confused by the difference between affordable and workforce, and they tend to lump it all together.
yeah,
And there's a real difference there, as far as, income levels, and people are shocked. When, I say 120% of, and I don't know, I
yeah,
forget what the number is for the.
Yeah.
yeah,
But it's like, and they're like, that much? And I said, yeah, but this is how much you can buy and or rent with that income. And most people have no clue how much rents are.
yeah.
So that's another thing to bring into the conversation, if we can get those numbers.
One of the things that, we bounced around in a couple of emails was kind of creating, I don't know, a glossary
Mhm.
of sorts of useful terms and probably. One, words that matter, but two, words that people may have heard before, right? Whether it's affordable and workforce, whether it's LIHTC
Right,
or CEA,
Right.
or kind of the buzzwords that people keep hearing
Right.
in meetings and buzzwords that people keep reading about and giving definitions about them and what is AMI?
Yeah.
Right, and what is
Right.
60% of AMI and what does that all mean?
Yeah.
And so. Yeah, I think,
Hasn't this been done already? Doesn't somebody have this right off the shelf, like the city of Portland or South Portland, or
yeah.
Chat
are we
GPT,
breaking new ground here?
Well, yeah, but
there
we
are-
need to present it
yeah,
in the eyes of Scarborough, so, yeah, the data's out there and we can probably get it.
I just mean you're talking about defining terms.
oh, it's not defining, I mean, so
No.
the issue, it's sort of think about cutting and pasting. Things that exist. Right, so earlier today, I started typing, here are some terms that might be useful to 7 counselors. And
Yeah.
let's grab those
Isn't
definitions.
there also an element, and maybe it's not in this first session, is kind of framing the argument and making it. In context, whether it's our region, our state, and certainly for Scarborough, and.
Yeah.
I've seen a couple things, one thing came through Realtor.com this week, and the headline was how much. A family of 4 in every state needs to earn to afford a house.
Yeah,
And we have access to a lot of data, but I think it's really important to kind of sift through that and
yeah,
pull out big data points that help tell that story and help demonstrate the need.
one thing where I'll throw this out as a thought with that, so sometimes I tell my kids, I sort of give them a little life hack that probably shouldn't tell them, but I say people hate being told what to do. And maybe even
Or what's good
being
for them.
told, or what's good for them, or they don't like being told to eat their broccoli or something. And so I wonder, like, if we could, to some extent, or as long as possible, try to, work.
I'm waiting for the life hack.
Yeah, sort of like wait to proselytize as long as possible. There's sort of a certain element of some of what might come from that says, and we're telling you this because you ought to support affordable housing. And if instead, if we could say, here's how to understand the issues, or here are the tools to understand the issues.
But know your audience. I've heard from
Right.
members of sitting on council right now that Scarborough's done its fair share for the region. We've done enough. And
Yeah.
there's some truth to that. We are our leader and we should be proud of that, but that doesn't, and
Right.
so I'm not saying it's a wrong view, but that's a view.
Yeah.
And I think it's partially, we should anticipate that and I'm
Mhm.
not saying combat it, but,
Yeah.
surround it with data.
And
Right.
Facebook's already busy slamming the potential market.
Yeah, there's gonna be some
Yeah.
headwinds from our
Yeah.
view, from a number of unlikely suspects.
Yeah,
And I will say, and I don't think I'm talking out of school, and I'm perfectly willing to say this, yeah, this is all being recorded. I personally.
We're also live.
Yeah,
We're not
well,
gonna record
well,
it.
yeah, in that case, I'll really work on my presentation. But I do think in thinking and sort of jumping around a little bit, but I think there's real overlap among different boards and committees and kind of quote unquote interest groups, for lack of a better way to put it. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way on this issue. And I think about myself personally and the fact that I was, a strong supporter and advocate for the land bond. And the council just voted the other night, first reading, to approve the first expenditure out of that. But one thing that does make me a little uneasy sometimes is I hear, and I think it's part of why the land bond passed as overwhelmingly as it did, is that part of the appeal of it is that it's a way to stop growth.
Right,
You hear it.
absolutely.
We heard it last Wednesday night during public comment.
Yep.
And I don't hold that against anyone at all. It was part of the selling point of it, but what the point I'm making there is I do think that as we move forward with this, it's going to be important to try to reach across, so to speak, to try to bridge some of those different groups. And I think there's going to be greater opportunity for buy-in at some level if there is some crossover and an understanding that, in my mind anyway, one of the reasons why it makes sense to have things like the land bond and the kind of zoning that we have with designated growth areas is that, yes, we can protect natural resources and open space. But the other part of that equation that makes the equation balance is that means that we're actually going to be building some things, including housing in certain areas. And we're going to that may involve some density. And so I think it's going to be important to, in my mind anyway, to kind of articulate that and have those conversations, because I do worry a little bit sometimes that I know that there is this, it's not just an undercurrent, it's a current.
Yeah.
And they're very valid concerns about growth and costs and everything else, but I would hate for it to be sort of two different camps. That There's kind of a conservation / anti-growth camp, and then people who kind of support housing. I would hope that there would be some overlap there and the recognition that it all kind of ideally works together.
Yeah.
The way I view it is there's land out there and this so-called private property rights and whatever with people. And that's why we do ordinances, and that's why we do land use, to have some control over how land is utilized. But to be honest with you, as a town, do we want to just let wealthy builders come in and build big houses, and that just makes the value of the town go up and whatever? But then we're leaving behind all sorts of people who contribute to the diversity of the town and work. Of course, me with the workforce, it's like, who's gonna work in the stores? Who's gonna work in the restaurants? Who's gonna, we need to have places for them to build. I don't know, I just see this as a way of helping to control growth, if that makes sense, because it directs it. It directs it in a certain way, in a way that's beneficial to the town, and you've got to show people how it benefits the town.
Corey, do you think there's an opportunity in this workshop, or maybe in a future one, to start talking about costs the town takes on with development? Where, let's say, a cul-de-sac development is approved and the town makes the decision to take on the burden of a dead-end street rather than keeping it with the developer. Which doesn't really seem like a smart, cost decision, and whether there's some opportunities to reduce the cost of growth rather than limiting the growth.
There may be something there. I think it could at least be introduced as a concept, that may be counterintuitive to some people, at least to put it out there. But there could be, the default kind of status quo is often kind of assumed to be, cheaper or, preferable.
What's interesting is affordable housing gets far more scrutiny and attention than any other development. And that's
Oh, yeah.
Is
because,
that right?
well, by virtue of the fact that in almost all cases, there needs to be additional council action. Other projects, so long as it complies with land use and meets all the regulations, it gets approved, it goes to the
Right.
planning board.
Mm.
And it doesn't ever reach
Right.
front page, much,
Yeah.
in front of the council, but more often than not, there's a contract zone because these projects require a level of density or creativity that
Yeah,
our regulations don't allow. They almost all require credit
And
enhancement
you're-
agreements.
And you're giving tax breaks to
So-
developers.
But what
God
comes
help
with
us.
that is a level of, deep level of understanding of the economics of these projects.
Yeah.
And that's important because we're being asked to participate in that. So, yeah, there's a bit of an irony associated with that this type of development gets far more scrutiny and attention than
Yeah.
anything else does.
I wonder if there's a way to, we talked a little bit about, where are the multifamily developments in town, which ones are affordable, and where are some other developments, and I wonder if there's a way to kind of, demonstrate visually for people, how many touch points to the public process some of those developments have. Um,
One thing that would be wise to do, and I'll just share a map that staff is starting to work on. Is just ground this conversation with the comprehensive plan. That probably ought to be where we start the conversation, frankly.
Yeah.
Because that is our touch point. That's for as a community.
mm,
So I've not studied this and or scrutinized it, but this is the map and the legend. This is a map that shows all, I'll say multifamily, anything above 4 units.
Oh, okay.
And I'm just a little astounded by the number. My quick review here, we're in the 80s.
oh, wow.
Some of them are fairly small.
What was the unit cutoff again, Tom?
4 units,
And there's 80 such examples of it in town?
at least in this, and I'm just trying to
I
look
saw
at the
the
legend
80.
here to get a sense of them. So this isn't very helpful. It simply numbers them and, there's all sorts of attributes, information we can
Yeah.
add. But this tells you distinctly the different projects, the number of units, and then to the extent that our assessing database has, whether they're income restricted or not, that's noted.
Yeah.
We could also add year built. I think what
Yeah.
my sense is that there was some fairly large projects that were built back in the early mid-80s,
Mhm.
Coach Lantern and.
Oh,
and
right.
others. And then we went for a long stretch with probably, years and here and there, onesie twosies. And then in the last 5 to 7 years, we've seen this kind of resurgence,
Mm.
and most of them, well, there's a fair number of affordable projects, but there's also a big bunch of luxury apartments that
Oh, yeah.
fall into this category. They're not single family.
Yeah.
So I can circulate this and I'd be interested in feedback. If
Yeah.
something was happy, I want to make sure we're producing something that
Right.
demonstrates what we want.
Great. And I think to your point, Tom, it's sort of part of the irony of it is that in my experience anyway, some of the chatter that I hear, it's a lot of the visceral response to multifamily growth comes in response to the unregulated, so to speak, projects that are market rate. So
Yeah.
the project at 8 Corners, and
Oh, yeah.
and
Mm,
and the one on Higas,
Mhm.
where all the, people come around the corner and all of a sudden this
Another
thing's
one, yeah.
coming out of the ground and they don't hear as much about it because it doesn't get the scrutiny that
Yeah.
you described,
Right.
Tom.
Yeah.
So, but it all gets kind of conflated, understandably, among the general public when it comes to growth and
And those two
housing.
projects, we've had the occasion to know them pretty well. We know the economics of those projects. They're absolute cash cows for us. I mean, they are
Oh, yeah.
self-sufficient. They ask for nothing.
Mm.
They have very few kids for the schools. They don't require trash. What they do bring is traffic and population.
Yeah.
And which
and a-
demands on our
Right.
recreation and our
Yeah,
beaches. And, I'm not saying there's nothing,
But they're also, all of those same people are gonna be driving either through Scarborough if they're not sleeping here anyways, right?
Yeah. And obviously, to that point, Setco and GP Cog have a lot of great data on demographics and commuting patterns and things like that. That I remember that being discussed when we were updating the comp plan. So it all there, and a lot of it kind of cuts to some, you know, intuition that people have that might not be completely accurate.
So for the workshop, does it make, I think it makes sense to maybe start as a reminder, or maybe education for the first time, what the comp plan says.
Hmm,
And
if there's goals or.
I can't even be cited, I'm embarrassed to say that I need a refresher, but I think that is the touch point that, we need to start with.
Cause I don't think we, and I'm probably talking too much, but I don't think we should, I don't think anyone involved should underestimate the possibility that there are gonna be people on council and in the general public who are gonna say, where did this come from?
Right,
Why is this even, why is this a goal? Why are we doing, why is the town doing this? So I think it'd be good to have it rooted in some, you know, this is consistent with a comp plan.
Could we even go
And-
so far as to explain where comp plans come from and who makes them? Is it a little man in a back room, or is it? Is
It gets, yeah,
neighbors who
Yeah.
get together and?
yeah,
I think we
Draw
can
these
speak
up,
to
or-
that.
we could speak to that a little bit, and, you know, I think they're, as with any.
It's not a little man in a room,
Right,
is
yeah.
it? But yeah, because that's gonna be the question, right? It's like, oh, well, you know, this is a document and who knows where it comes from. It's not the will of the people, it's.
Right. Right, and there's a perception among some that things are overly developer driven.
Yeah.
And. You know, yeah. Comp plan process was, you know, that's a whole different conversation, but there are
Oh,
a
yeah.
lot of different
The
touch
point is
points
there's
for
the whole
public
process,
input
right?
and,
Yeah,
and, you know, it's like when the town does surveys.
yeah,
People kind of cite different survey results depending on what the
Yeah.
conversation is, like, well, yes, people are concerned about growth in traffic, but people also are concerned about housing affordability.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
But that's a good part of the introduction because.
yeah,
Because the counselors don't know what the comp plan says about affordable and workforce housing.
right,
So,
yeah,
If you like, I'll circulate the excerpt.
That would be-
There's a couple of pages that are
yeah,
printed. Yep. It's probably worth developing a series of slides that kind of capture the essence of what the comp plan says. A big part of this is leaving a chunk of it for discussion. I think
Yeah.
what we want to hear is what councils are thinking and what they're lacking, and maybe that will help inform the next iteration of this.
mhm.
This afternoon I went online to see what's for sale in Scarborough right now. I mean, there's something on the order of either 101 or 110
Yeah.
places for sale, some of it's land, but it was interesting to do a little bit of a comparison between, you know, what you can buy and whether it's kind of in the range or out of the range of what workforce housing would be. And, you know, and without being like, without the ridiculous, you know, the $1 million plus homes or the
I got a real good
beach
one.
affected ones,
But
but
it's too ridiculous anymore.
Yeah. But, you know, I don't know if that might be something that's useful for counselors to see that, you know, either some of the things are out of range or the things that are within range, kind of here's what that looks like.
I think that is helpful. That starts to ground.
Yeah.
the issue.
That's where.
Yeah.
That's a piece
I
of
had
change.
someone, just a resident voter emailed me a couple months ago to say, you know, concerned about housing development and growth and said, look, go on LinkedIn and I think at the time it was around the same number, you
Yeah.
know, and those places are available, you know?
Yeah.
And I took time to respond and I pointed out that, you know, the average price of those, not counting land, was close to $1 million and
Yeah.
that doesn't seem ideal and you know, there is a sentiment and again, I think this is all going to come out in council and public discussion, but you know, there sometimes is a sentiment that, you know, if you can't afford to live here, then live somewhere else.
Oh, yeah,
And that, you know, that can be a conversation, but
Yeah.
that's,
The other part of housing in general is housing choice and diversity. And that's something that I think we're starting to create some diversity. And I think we've heard a member of councils speak quite clearly. His view is that, it's the American dream. People ought to be, owning homes. It's not rental is really not where it's at. And, let's not minimize how many people might share a similar view of how things are.
Is that worth talking about at this workshop? So that's an opinion, right? I don't know if I would elevate it to literature, but people write and think about the benefits of ownership and the benefits of rentership. Right, if you're owning, you get to be an owner, and that's nice, but when you own a home, you also need to fix your window when it gets broken, and you also need to fix the boiler when it breaks,
But there's also a difference between renting out of necessity or renting by choice, right?
Right.
I think that is, maybe it's not a new phenomenon, but I think there are folks in the boomer generation and then probably on the other end, millennials who are
Yeah.
choosing it. And could otherwise, if you look at the rent they're paying, they could service a pretty healthy mortgage. But it's a life choice.
I have the market summary right here for Scarborough, just if you want. The end of March, there were 46 active listings. The median list price is $759,850. The sold median is 803,500. Just those numbers
Yeah.
there, it's like, and the new median list price is $759,850. So.
Yeah.
Would it influence people's thinking if we had data on the number of units in town in this category of pricing and then upwards? I would think the assessing department probably has that. Because if you're trying to say, are we carrying our share of the load? Or not, is there a comparison to other communities nearby that the assessor might be, have an ability to weigh in on?
So you're talking about, X amount, number of houses within the
Yeah,
under $300,000
yeah, that are
range or
assessed.
whatever.
Yeah,
Assessed
We've
or
got a pretty good, our assessment level
Yeah.
is pretty close to what things sell for, right?
It's on the heels of rebound.
Yeah.
yeah, so, I mean, that would,
From here on out, they're only getting worse.
Yeah,
No, further from market.
yeah,
Although I
Yeah.
am starting to see a little,
well, and it's part of, our people want to know, we're gonna build a lot of low-income affordable housing, but what the heck is, Cape Elizabeth doing?
Yeah.
What's so-and-so doing?
Yeah.
Why are we shouldering that for?
Yeah.
oh, yeah, I mean,
Right.
that does definitely come up.
Well, I think that does, when you, like, the way you phrase that, like, what are we doing, or that sort of phrasing, and that is something that you hear. And I do think that part of, I think one of the interesting things to hopefully come out of the workshop will be kind of on the theme of definitions, like what do we mean when the town talks about supporting housing of different types? What does that mean, and how much of that is land use policy versus things like CEAs? It's unless things really change dramatically, it doesn't mean that the town's going to get into the business of building public housing.
Right,
But I do think that, again, really dialing it back to like the real bare bones basics, because I think that is part of the challenge sometimes too, in addition to some of the other definitions, is kind of understanding what it is that the town can and can't do, or should and shouldn't do,
Brian, to your point of a glossary of terms, and there may be some things that we want to highlight, like focus on, but we could produce something that's a kind of a takeaway that we don't need to spend time to kind of walk them through and say.
we don't need to read the.
No, but some collateral material that, again, the point of this is to start to build this base of understanding, right? and having something they can refer back to,
Right.
so when LIHTC comes up, they.
I remember that.
Oh, they, that's not, they don't wanna ask the question.
Yeah.
But if they have something to refer to.
Yeah. You know, I wonder too, sometimes there's this notion of, we talk about affordable housing. And half the people, in the room, not this room, but like the room, say, oh my goodness. Those are the really, really, really low income people, and I've got a picture of those people in my head.
Those people.
Those people, and I can't imagine those people in my town. Ew. And then the other half of the people in the room say, oh my goodness, those rents that you're gonna charge at that quote unquote low income housing, those are so high. How can that count for low income? That doesn't make sense. That's not poor enough.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
And so, and the distinction is Section 8 housing versus tax credit housing. And I wonder, I wonder what a conversation looks like around that.
Section 8 still exists,
It does, yeah. and-
even with HUD and the.
Does HUD still exist?
I get-
They actually, they
They're
updated the
moving.
rents on time last week
Yeah.
against
You know
all.
what's
Oh, they did?
helpful?
Yep.
I
Alright.
find, and I didn't appreciate it until I spent some time with this, is there's just huge misunderstanding of the general definition of what is affordable, was 30% of.
Oh,
household
right,
income.
exactly.
I think it's worth spending some time, kind of laying out those basic fundamentals, and then
Yeah,
we could even bring in what the current income levels are.
Mhm.
And relate those to our current standards of 120 and 80%.
Yep,
I think that helps people understand. What we're talking about is not really low. These are most of the town employees
Mm.
and probably a majority of town residents.
yeah.
Fall into those bands.
Is all of the affordable housing in Scarborough tax credit? I imagine it is. I don't know. I'm not aware of this
Credit, meaning,
from LIHTC. And there's no HUD Section 8 properties or are.
I know.
I think there are,
There are?
Where?
Scarborough Gardens.
Oh, yeah,
I think
that's
the Oaks is probably falls into.
Maybe vouchers.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
voucher.
yeah.
Because then I don't know how far this is gonna wander for some people who might be at this, but when you start getting into, well, it's our taxpayer money that's funding these things, and you got to start hearing.
Oh, it will.
And then
Oh,
things
yeah.
like, how much, is there any impact to GA in the town of Scarborough for residents who are in these homes?
But and you think about what is been built a lot in the last 5 years, and it really is driven by housing's emphasis, it's the senior affordable. And many of those are very low, 40s, 60% AMI. But that should be relatable, because that is the parents of many of our residents. These are folks that have worked hard their whole lives.
Yeah.
That are good upstanding citizens that are recently, lost a loved one, or, whatever the case is, but that's the other end of the spectrum.
Yep.
I do think there's power in that whole progression of like, here's what 120% of AMI is for a family of four.
Yeah.
Here's what 30% of your income could buy in today's interest rate mortgage
Yes.
environment with 20%, if you had 20% down.
Yes.
And here's what's on the market for
Yes.
something like that.
Exactly.
And when they actually see that all lined up and you're like, well, that house needs $150,000
Yeah.
worth of work.
Well, that's the missing
And
ingredient
I,
too. right?
Yeah,
I
exactly.
think a corollary to that, and again, I totally agree with what you said, Brian, about not, you'll be careful about not seem like you're lecturing people. But I think a corollary to that is maybe showing changes over time. Because I think there is it's not exclusively, but I think there is a significant amount of the discourse in town that's kind of generational.
Yeah.
And so, there's kind of this whole meme of why wasn't I smart enough to be born to buy my house in 1958?
Right.
yeah.
I wish I had thought of that.
Yeah.
I
was born 20 years
think
ago.
there is a certain amount of that. I'd be curious to know how much it really is, but just anecdotally, it feels that way sometimes, that there are folks who are living in homes that they bought in the 80s or whatever.
Yeah.
And not that there's anything.
I'll bet there's anything wrong.
But if
with
you
that.
haven't been in the housing market, if you've not been in the housing market in the last 20
Right.
years, 10, or especially the last 10 years, you
Yeah.
have no concept
People has no, they have no clue.
of how hard it is, and what
Yeah,
that
to
barrier,
enter.
what the barriers to entry
Yeah.
are.
It sounds really elemental too, but just showing what interest, changes in interest rates
Yeah.
can do for buying power.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
People that are still have a 3% mortgage, and that some of those are, I'm there too.
yeah,
But the history of the
1.75
market,
maybe.
the history of the marketplace that has changed the equation for so many people. Typically, people will say fire, police,
Younger people,
younger
my
people,
daughter,
just priced out.
yeah,
And that story needs to be told,
yes.
because it then justifies making arrangements to try and
Mhm.
balance it.
Right.
And I hear sometimes from older constituents that, and they're the ones that complain. But yet on the other side, they'll say, well, my granddaughter, she can't afford to live, anywhere near here. They had to buy a house way out and wherever. And I don't understand. It's so it's really,
yeah.
it just shows that they
Right.
don't quite, they can't put it all together.
I
as
do
far
think
as-
walking through the financial exercise that Eric just laid out would be
Yeah.
helpful and.
Yeah, I
instructive.
agree.
Tom, can I share a screen real quick? Is there a way to?
You should have rights.
Eric, shoot me your
Unless-
email. I'll send
say
you
you're not
some
a
real
panelist.
estate
I'm a-
stats.
Yeah, let's see.
I sent it
Tom,
to
who
these guys. I don't have your
staffs
email.
this initiative
Or I don't know.
for? You are, right?
Right, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
That's one of the problems is.
I mean, well, you can say to so-and-so, this is how high you need to jump to get the, but you're right, we don't have a person
We don't,
like a Jamie Fitch or
not that's dedicated, specializes in housing, no.
yeah,
No.
Where'd you get these?
On the internet,
Which one?
the World Wide Web.
I know, but which outfit?
Well, these are all listed on,
Zillow or something.
yes.
I was gonna ask, is it
Scoville-
Zillow?
These are Scoville.
These are current?
Scoville Foley today.
What?
Today,
Do you mind that? I don't know how to.
This
What
is
are you
not
doing?
like, this just got awkward.
yeah, right. Sorry, Jimmy. But,
Okay.
but yeah, so
That, like-
what,
No, I don't.
what this has is.
I like them. I like them.
What this has is 80% of AMI and 120% of AMI for different bedroom sizes.
Yeah.
With the brand new income limit score.
I was just gonna ask.
Nice.
And
Yeah.
then for each of these homes, presuming a 6.75% interest rate, 30-year loan. The real estate taxes for each home.
Yeah.
And an assumption about utilities.
Yep.
What
the income
what the
is.
housing cost is, assuming 90% loan
Yep.
value. Let's see, what income you would need in order for the housing cost to be not housing burdened.
Yep.
And then whether that income is over or within the housing, the income limit.
I like this.
So for this house, this little, whatever it is, three bedroom, one bath.
I can't, where is it?
That's
Oh, that's the Downs.
153 Scarborough Downs Road.
Gotcha.
Just came out today.
That is
Yeah,
2,000 square feet. This one. That's actually, oh no, I'm sorry, this would not, you could not buy this,
No,
right? So
Yep.
that costs too much.
Yep.
This one, you could not buy,
right,
right, which is like perfect for a senior.
Yep.
Single level living.
yeah.
It's just, I'm a little concerned, people will identify those two happen to be the downs, or
Yep.
people are gonna say,
The down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
so just.
Yeah, there are a lot of different
This one-
landlines.
This one on Orchard Street,
Yep,
Nailed it.
$500,000, this.
So how are you
is
doing
that the list price?
This
Is that the
This
list
is the
price?
list price.
Because list price is probably gonna go higher.
Orchard Street?
Over
It's
by,
over-
Right behind Ace?
Back
Yeah.
behind Dunst, behind Dairy
Behind
Corner.
Ace and Dunster?
Yeah.
So how are you coming up with the income for these?
So this is, if you take the housing cost and divide it by 30%. Or assume that the housing cost is 30% of,
Okay, so that's telling you what the income needs to be.
yeah,
Yeah, more or less, yeah,
Let's try
for
that
qualifying.
yeah.
And that's with
for it to be
20% down,
affordable. 10% down.
10% down.
And
Oh, yeah.
then you'd need $54,000.
And how are you calculating within or without? You know,
If this is less than, if this amount is less than, or if it's within this range.
okay, so
for a three
you are
bedroom.
relating that house has 3 beds, and so you're
Yeah.
taking the corresponding income.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's this equity line? What's
That's
that?
how much of a down payment you'd have to make.
Whew.
So for somebody to buy this.
That's
house,
what I meant by how much you gotta
Yep.
put down.
You
Yeah,
gotta-
okay.
10% of 540.
Yeah.
You gotta have a good job
Yeah, and then for this
and
one,
been saving up
yeah,
Or
to
wealthy
afford
parents.
this.
which is kind
Or
of
wealthy
a,
parents.
I have a lot of
typical
first time
Star
buyers.
House,
Yeah,
which is, out on Holmes Road.
Yeah.
This one you could not afford,
Right? Oh, yeah, no way.
or you could afford it, but you would not do it within that income limit.
And the reality is, many, many, many people are well over 30%. They're in that house,
Mhm.
Mhm.
but they're not funding their retirement.
Right.
right, right.
And that one on Orchard Street, I know you don't have this, Brian, but the thing that gets me is like, if you flip through the pictures and look at the condition of the
Yeah,
home.
it's gonna need work, right?
It's going to need.
Yeah.
And that one you've got
Yeah,
on
it's
Sawyer.
right. And then there's this one, right? Sawyer Road.
That is
It's a
that-
1 bedroom.
And they can't give it away.
Yep.
'Cause
Cause it probably
it's-
needs work too.
Well, it needs work and it's in a flood zone. I think the new
Yeah.
flood zone
Yeah.
thing, there's a creek right behind it
Yeah.
and there's all sorts of,
So that's a 1 bedroom.
It's a 1 bedroom, 1 bath,
yeah, it's weird.
and that's what you can buy.
I think it's a
And that's-
foreclosure.
Oh, and this
to be
does get
honest.
to-
So you need income of 80,000 for that one?
Yep.
Yeah, but 1 bedroom,
Yeah.
you should
It
be using a
needs-
household or two, shouldn't you?
It needs probably $150,000 worth of work.
Yeah.
So for a 1 bedroom, that's,
Household two.
the income limits are between 72 and 109.
And you can't get a mortgage on it, I'll bet you.
Let's assume you can.
Okay.
Right.
Theoretically.
I think
Yeah.
this is a terrific exercise. I'm just a little concerned about active listings and people knowing the homes.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And people what?
No,
Knowing
You're-
the
he-
homes
yeah.
or.
You're absolutely right. You
Yeah.
should not be using.
Yeah.
Active listings.
Alright.
Can we do the same exercise with
Some
older listings?
Yeah.
I mean, ones that are
Or
already
you could at
closed?
least,
Yeah.
yeah, and you could obviously aggregate.
Yep.
But, yeah,
Are these Scoville Foley
We stopped,
listings?
yeah.
No,
Well,
they're
these are,
not.
no, these are.
No,
just
right, I was gonna say, I know that.
Main
one's not.
IDX.
Well, that's our multiple listings. isn't it?
Yeah, so that's just kind of one way to look at this to see, to your kind of question you asked earlier, Bill. There are some things that are for sale out in the community. That would be affordable to people within that income band. And to Eric's point, some of those likely need work. And to Jean Marie's point, there's still a huge down payment needed, even if you can afford the monthly payment.
Or you
Yeah.
can't get a mortgage at all because
Well,
of the
let's see.
condition of the house.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't look like the prospective
It's
buyer
cash
would
only.
feel like he's got value
Right.
for that much
Right.
money.
Right.
Which is your point that the marketplace has changed so dramatically. It's become so much more expensive.
Yeah.
yeah.
let's not
And
forget
then
this-
we've run into the issue that we're running into at the Downs with one of our affordable buyers, which is. Owning is nice when owning is nice, but when you wanna move.
Oh, yeah,
And the market's turned on you, owning isn't so nice,
Yeah,
right.
right?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing to keep in mind is we're focused on workforce and affordable. But
Right.
I think there's, like we said, that just a general housing discussion. I think,
I was gonna make that,
yeah,
that comment as well, yeah.
whether it's our
kind of-
kids or our friends or,
Right.
we all know someone that would love to live in Scarborough,
Right.
Yeah.
but can't.
Right.
That's right.
And I have no way to document this, but I'm certain
Well-
there are folks,
Oh.
there's this pent up demand in our community.
No, that's, can you guys hear me?
Yes,
Okay, so I just want to circle back a little bit. I've been listening to this. We're supposed to be preparing for a workshop, right? So is the purpose of the workshop to discuss what affordable housing is? You know, the guidelines, the policies, that sort of thing? Or is the purpose to discuss why we don't have as much as we want to have, if that's what we want?
Yes.
Yes, both.
Well, but I think the purpose is to give the counselors who are gonna be dealing with these issues going forward, the basic knowledge they need to make good decisions in the future.
Because it appears, as a layman, you guys all know this a heck of a lot more than I do, but it seems like the definition of affordable housing isn't really affordable for a lot of people.
You got that right.
Misnomer.
Well, so I think that's the problem, because it is. And it is by definition, and so I think that's gonna be one of our challenges for this workshop.
There's just no
Because-
inventory.
The definition is that is a third of your budget.
So,
And,
so we're going to educate the council on why we don't have as much as what we want.
yes,
Why do we want it?
Well, what is it?
I mean, do we want more workforce?
yes,
Do we want more affordable? And what are our challenges? You guys have all been discussing what the challenges are. It's interest rates, it's the market, it's the cost of construction. Something here is out of whack. And can we do anything about that?
But there are things the council can do as policymakers and land use in terms of higher density, smaller lot size, ADUs. There's other ways. It's not the 3,000 square foot, 4-bedroom colonial. The way it becomes affordable is it's different, right? Go back to my point of housing choice and diversity.
And Bob, I think the answer to the question is affordable versus workforce. I think the answer is yes to all of it. We'd love some at 60% AMI. We'd love some at 120 AMI. I just don't think there's that existing in the market right now.
Right.
and I think. This will sound silly at first, but the way to make things more affordable is to make them more affordable. But a part of that is to reduce the cost of making them. But as a builder. When you reduce the cost of making something, unless someone's telling you can charge less for it. When you reduce the cost, you're just increasing your margins.
Or the other thing
Right.
government can do is require it.
Right.
Restricted.
Because if you let the market, clearly, if you let the market do what it'll do. They're not gonna
People
do it.
willing to pay, and there's a willingness, there's something lovely about Scarborough. There's a lot lovely about Scarborough, where people are willing to pay an unaffordable amount to live here.
Yeah.
People are willing to pay more than 30% of their budget to live here.
But herein is one of the purposes of government, I might suggest, the inclusionary zoning is if the market is not gonna do it on its own. Then you force them to, at least not entirely, but a portion of what they do. Is something they wouldn't do if left to their own devices.
Does the
Right.
town-
But Isn't that something we want to explain to the council?
I think planting those seeds, those are the policy discussions that need to flow out of this at some point, yes.
And just to pull that a little further. So then we've got a group of people who are gonna end up paying 30% of their budget because we're forcing somebody to. And then we've got a bunch of other people who are willing to pay more than 30% of their budget because there's something lovely about Scarborough and they're willing to. And so then I think part of our challenge is to explain to the policymakers and to the people who think there's something lovely about Scarborough why it's worth it to have this group of people that's only paying 30% of their income to live
Yeah.
here, when they're willing to stretch. And maybe that's part of where some of that,
I think until it's personal, a lot of people
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
either suck it up and. Are paying more than they should,
yeah,
but until their kids aren't able to afford or
Right,
their elderly parent, needs to do something different.
right.
It's only then do they kind of appreciate really what's going on,
Does the town get notified of foreclosures?
not necessarily.
No,
So I'm just curious how, of that bucket of people who are paying more than 30%, do they all succeed?
They
Yeah.
don't.
but there aren't many foreclosures
the
right
only-
now.
No, the only time we would be aware is if there's non-payment of taxes, they're
Right,
calling us.
right.
So
Yeah.
we see,
We get
we see it
leads.
before it happens, and usually it gets rectified before it ever goes to foreclosure.
There's a lot of reasons for foreclosures, right? And
Yeah,
one of them is that people spend more than they have, more than they can afford, and the mortgage companies let them do it. You know, there's nothing we're gonna do about that, and that's always gonna be the case. But, you know, I'm just
Hope you're
trying
like a former banker.
I was gonna say, you know
Yeah.
about that, Bob?
seen it a couple of times, but I'm just trying to understand what we want to do in this workshop that we're going to have with the council. You know, because again, in my layman's mind, it's affordable and workforce housing is just not working in Scarborough the way we'd all like it to be. Of course, there's always going to be people that, you know, will look down on that and stuff, but you know, what do we want to do, if anything, to try to make this more affordable? And what can we do? I mean, what are we allowed to do, if anything?
I think to an extent, it kind of gets to, you know, Brian mentioned earlier, you know, kind of what I would think of as like hidden costs of kind of the status quo. And you were talking about you're framing it more in terms of like infrastructure that the town has to kind of take on. But I would suggest that, you know, there's a people side of it. And kind of the, you know, this gets into maybe the next level of the conversation further on, once we kind of define the terms and all that. But I think just kind of anticipating potential pushback or skepticism, I think it might be helpful to think about it in those terms of sort of the opportunity cost of not having places for those folks to live. And that we're, you know, we've heard the feedback from, you know, from town departments about not being able to have employees
Yeah.
live in town, and that has a cost.
Yeah.
And we're potentially missing out on skilled people who would contribute to the community. Not that anybody should have to demonstrate
Yeah.
Right,
that in some mathematical way.
Yeah.
I just want to flash this up on the screen. Jean Marie just shared with us all,
well, I didn't share, because I don't have everyone's email, because I don't have my town details anymore.
So that's getting ahead of things a little bit, but I think it does cut to the, like, why are we doing this? You
Yeah.
know, why?
I just wanted to touch on this while we are all together. Do you see any value in this sort of data? This is number of listings, list prices.
Yeah, I
for
definitely
rates
think
sold.
that's,
I tend to think the analysis that Brian walked us through really kind of breaks it down at a
Yeah.
granular level.
Does.
It really kind of relates it to, personalizes it more.
These give you a picture,
Yeah.
kind of, you could use like just these
Yeah.
two listings and listing prices, or, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Just to give people an idea of how much houses cost in Scarborough.
I bet you if we took something like this, and then if we took some examples of sold homes and did, you know, with the spreadsheet.
But how do you introduce the notion of the income that starts to show that gap? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, you gotta know home size and you need to know the specifics of the house.
All right, stop sharing.
What's that times 3?
What times are?
144, 513 times 3. And the reason I'm asking is, generally speaking, a house should be 1/3 of your income, even potentially the value of the house that you buy. You know what I'm saying? So you take your total income, multiply it by 3, and that's more or less. Bob, am I way off on that? Is that old fashioned? Can't hear you,
I got a family commitment.
Sorry.
So-
Sorry. No, I don't think you are, you know.
Thank you, champion.
so you figure your
Thank you.
income is X amount, you multiply that by 3, and that's more or less the house you can afford. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, see?
I didn't mean for you all to get quiet.
No, they're all thinking.
No pressure, Tom.
And Bill, we chased Bill off. He left.
So I think I'll share the comp plan. I think synthesizing that into a couple of slides to kind of frame
Yeah.
it is,
Mhm.
we didn't do it, the community told us, right?
Then maybe some definitions.
More as a handout,
Yeah,
collateral piece.
And I'll have April numbers by the end of April, because we're meeting in May, right? So I can get you, if you wanna see that chart.
Yeah, and the reason I wanted to.
Or
pull
you
this
know
together
someone
is
else
just
who
To the
would give
extent we
it to you,
needed
too.
to prepare some materials, I wanted a little lead time.
Okay,
So yeah, we certainly can and should use the most up-to-date data, although. I really like the exercise and maybe it should take even one step back is to start at. Here are the 10 income bands and what it means in our
yeah,
Halton
Yeah.
area. And then walking people through those real life examples. These are actual listings or were actual listings. This is what it would take to buy this house.
Yep.
Yep.
Let's not try to do too much.
no,
Yeah,
keep it
yeah.
simple.
And then maybe if. It, in this, if we've got some information on vacancies and roles in different departments in the town. Or if we've got some information on, wages
Oh,
that
right,
are paid or budgeted
I
in
think that's a
town.
great idea to put like, this
Right.
this is how much a patrol officer makes. This is how much a,
bank
Yeah,
teller.
we've been
Uh,
trying to hire firemen for the past 6 months.
Oh, you wanna
and
keep
we
it
can't.
just town, or you want something in bank?
I don't think necessarily has to be town employees, but I think those.
But
that
we've
could
got that
resonate.
data probably.
That
easier
data
than
is probably
anything else.
Yeah.
particularly accessible.
Karen Martin could be helpful.
Yeah.
She's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
data.
So I think that is another missing piece for some people,
Right.
especially if they haven't been in the workforce in a long time, or
Right.
if they're just not
They've-
in a certain
yeah.
industry, they don't have an
There must
appreciation
be
for.
census data on income for certain wage, or maybe it's DOL.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
Um,
if you're gonna do that, you're gonna definitely outline or define what the problem is. Right?
Yeah,
yeah,
Which,
yeah.
which is what we need to do, I think.
yeah,
right, agreed.
Bob, are you back May 7?
Yeah, I think, we're planning to the back 5th or the 6th, something like that.
do I dare ask where you are?
Well, security issues here.
Oh,
Jim Ray,
okay.
all right, let's. keep it
Well,
real
I have
safe.
I have a sunburn, if that means anything.
Nice, nice, I'm jealous.
And yeah, I mean, I think obviously, see when this, once the council discussion starts.
Hmm.
It'll go off in all kinds of different directions,
Yeah.
hopefully in some productive ways,
Yeah.
and, you know.
Yeah.
Folks aren't shy, so.
Right,
And there's such a abundance of resource here, and no one's right about this stuff. It's
No.
more just helping, not guide, but flush out the conversation. So I think you're right. Once conversation happens, I'm confident someone on the group can, find a way to answer that or fill in around it, if you will. And then we can
Everybody-
leave for feedback from the council in terms of what they see as next steps.
Everybody's
I
gonna,
think we'll
everybody's
eventually-
gonna wanna have an opinion, so we're gonna hear a lot.
oh, yeah,
You will.
Just like.
that's okay,
That's
Yeah.
fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
exactly.
I remember that.
Depends on the opinion, Bob.
remember that. All right, I think we've got enough to do, and if you don't mind, as we produce some things, maybe we'll share it
Yeah.
with the group and get feedback.
Great.
Tom, do you mind sharing those numbers? I sent it to a couple people that I, their
I'm gonna,
emails, I didn't have
I'm
everyone's
gonna leave
email
this
on it.
meeting here, Tom, online.
We would-
All right.
The
That,
ones you
that
just
one I
shared.
said, yeah,
Yep, I'll share.
just
it
so
to the
they
full
can
group.
see those
Yep,
numbers.
I'll do it. And Brian, what'd you say?
I just left the,
Okay.
yeah, great. Well, super. We ready to move on to public comment?
Go right ahead.
All right,
Sure.
do you have any guests besides?
do not.
Oh,
Nope.
man.
No one
Corey,
loves
you
us.
didn't draw anybody today. So I guess we are just recorded. All right,
Motion to
we've got
adjourn.
one last, oh, Eric, great, good job.
Second,
Any discussion about the merits of adjourning? No, all right, we're adjourned.
thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for being here. Bye.
Everybody.